Hey guys, tonight we're going to take a journey, not to the grand triumphs or the bustling markets of ancient Rome, but into the very personal, often heartbreaking, reality of its domestic life. Imagine this: you're a young Roman woman, perhaps in the early imperial period. The air is thick with the scent of jasmine and olive oil, and the sounds of celebratory flutes fill your villa. You're dressed in a beautiful white tunic, your hair adorned with ribbons. This isn't a fairy tale wedding. It's a solemn, life-altering contract, a transaction that will fundamentally reshape your future, often with little regard for your feelings. You probably won't survive this without a broken heart, or at least a profound sense of resignation. But we're going to dive into why love and marriage truly sucked for Roman women. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're feeling adventurous, drop your location and local time in the comments. I always love seeing where you guys are tuning in from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself in ancient Rome, a civilization famed for its laws, its military might, and its grand public spectacles. But beneath the veneer of its patriarchal society, the lives of women, particularly Roman women of respectable status, were rigidly defined by their roles within the family and by their marital status. The ideal Roman woman was chaste, modest, industrious within the home, and dedicated to producing legitimate children, especially sons, to carry on the family name. This was her primary purpose, and marriage was the gateway to fulfilling it. The popular image of Roman marriage might evoke powerful love stories, or perhaps the notorious scandals of empresses. But for the vast majority of Roman women, reality was far less dramatic and far more pragmatic. Marriage was a social and economic institution, a tool for alliances, for consolidating wealth, and for ensuring the continuity of the family line, rather than a union based primarily on personal affection or romantic love. You quickly learn that your role here is less about passion and more about progeny and property. One mainstream historical fact that immediately challenges the myth of romantic Roman unions is that marriage in ancient Rome, particularly for elite and respectable families, was predominantly an arranged alliance between families, negotiated by the pater familias, head of the household, for strategic reasons: wealth, social status, political connections, with the woman often having little to no say in the choice of her husband. Love, if it developed, was a happy, but often unexpected byproduct. Think about it. Your wedding day is essentially a business merger. A particularly quirky tidbit that sets the tone for this practical approach to matrimony is the Roman legal distinction between cum manu and sine manu marriages. In cum manu, with hand marriages, the wife passed into the legal control of her husband, becoming part of his family. In sine manu, without hand marriages, she remained legally under the control of her pater familias, her father or male guardian, even after marriage. The latter became more common over time, giving women a slight degree of legal independence from their husbands, but still keeping them under patriarchal control. Imagine being married, but legally, you're still your dad's property, not your husband's. And that subtle legal detail could have huge implications for your dowry and your future. Historians still argue whether the increasing prevalence of sine manu marriages in later Roman periods genuinely offered Roman women greater autonomy and control over their property, especially their dowry, indirectly leading to more influence within the household. Or if it was primarily a pragmatic development for families to retain legal control over their daughter's assets and avoid the complexities of a daughter's legal emancipation from her husband's authority. thus still serving patriarchal interests? Did it give women more power? Or just shift where their power came from? As you prepare for your own wedding day, a mix of apprehension and a quiet sense of duty washes over you. You might not know your husband-to-be well, or even at all. He could be much older than you, chosen for his wealth, his political connections, or his family's prestige. Your father, as the pater familias, holds absolute authority over your marriage, his decision final and unchallengeable. Your personal feelings, your hopes, your dreams of love are secondary to the strategic needs of your family. The wedding ceremony itself, while often festive, is a public declaration of this alliance. You might wear a special tunic, veil, and a crown of flowers. There's a procession, the signing of a marriage contract, and a symbolic sharing of fire and water. But beneath the rituals and the celebrations, the solemn reality of your new life as a Roman wife, and the limited agency you will possess, quietly asserts itself. Your journey into Roman marriage is just beginning, and you're about to discover just how profoundly it sucked for women. Having felt the initial solemnity of your wedding preparations, your understanding of Roman marriage immediately sharpens as you confront its most fundamental and often heartbreaking reality. Arranged marriages not for love. Forget romantic proposals, passionate courtships, or personal choice in finding a life partner. In ancient Rome, your union was overwhelmingly a strategic alliance, meticulously negotiated by the male heads of your family, often with little to no input from you. The bride. You quickly learn that your emotional desires are utterly secondary to the cold calculus of family prestige, economic gain, and political advantage, turning one of life's most intimate relationships into a transaction dictated by others. It's like being forced into a business merger where you are the primary asset being traded, and your feelings about the deal are completely irrelevant. You sit in your family home, perhaps as young as 12 years old, or slightly older, listening to hushed conversations between your paterfamilias, your father, or male guardian and representatives from another prominent Roman family. These aren't discussions about your happiness. They are negotiations about your future, meticulously calculating the potential benefits of a marital alliance. The air is thick with unspoken expectations, political maneuvering, and the precise weighing of social standing. Your fate is being decided in this room, and your voice, your preferences, are notably absent. One mainstream historical fact that utterly contrasts with modern romantic ideals is that marriage in ancient Rome, particularly among the elite and even substantial plebeian families, was predominantly an arranged institution, meticulously negotiated by the paterfamilias, head of the household of both families for strategic reasons, such as consolidating wealth, enhancing social status, securing political alliances, or resolving disputes, with the bride and groom often having little or no personal choice in the matter. Love, if it developed, was considered a fortunate but entirely secondary outcome. Think about it. Your entire emotional future is decided by your dad's calculator. Imagine the traits your paterfamilias would be looking for in a prospective groom, not necessarily kindness, charm, or intelligence, but rather his family's wealth, their political influence, their lineage, and their potential to bolster your own family's standing. He might be much older than you, perhaps a widower with children already, chosen for his established position, or he might be a young man from a powerful family, whose union with yours would solidify a crucial political pact. Your role is to be a dutiful daughter, accepting the choice made for you, understanding that your personal desires must be sacrificed for the greater good of the familia. A particularly quirky tidbit that reflects the pragmatic, almost detached view of marriage is the Roman legal custom of requiring only the intent of both parties to form a marriage, not a formal ceremony in every case. While public celebrations were common for social reasons, legally, a marriage could be established simply by a couple living together with the intent to be married. However, for elite arranged marriages, elaborate ceremonies and contracts were still the norm, ensuring the public recognition of the alliance. Imagine your entire marital status hinging on whether you and your husband intend to be married, rather than on a signed document. Though for the rich, the ceremony was crucial for display. Historians still argue whether the Roman system of arranged marriages, by prioritizing family and societal stability over individual emotional satisfaction, inadvertently led to more resilient social structures and political alliances that contributed to the longevity of the Roman state, or if it also fostered widespread marital unhappiness, infidelity, especially among men, which we'll address later, and a sense of emotional detachment within many elite households, impacting personal well-being. Did it build a stronger state, or just miserable individuals? The negotiations would encompass not just the groom's background, but also the dowry dues you would bring. Your dowry, often a significant sum of money, property, or goods, was a crucial component of the marriage contract, determining your value and security within the union. We'll delve deeper into the dowry's importance in the next section. It was your family's financial contribution to the marriage, ensuring your maintenance and demonstrating your family's wealth. The larger and more impressive your dowry, the more desirable you might be as a bride, regardless of your personal qualities. Your wedding day, then, is a public declaration of this carefully orchestrated alliance. You wear the traditional white tunic, the flame-colored veil flammeum, and a wreath of flowers, symbols of your purity and fertility. The ceremony is solemn, involving religious rites, the joining of hands dextrarum iunctio, and a formal procession to your new husband's home, where you are symbolically carried over the threshold. The focus is on the ritual, the contract, the public affirmation of the union between two families, not on the emotional bond between you and your husband. You feel a mix of apprehension, resignation, and perhaps a faint, flickering hope for eventual companionship. You look at your new husband, a stranger or a distant acquaintance, and realize that your life, from this moment forward, is inextricably linked to his, for better or worse, regardless of love. The awful truth about love and marriage for Roman women isn't about grand romantic gestures. It's about the stark, pragmatic reality of arranged marriages. Your union is a carefully calculated alliance, dictated by family strategy, transforming one of life's most personal relationships into a profound economic and social transaction, ensuring that your emotional desires were often a secondary consideration to the enduring bonds of power, property, and patriarchal control, a constant reminder of the profound lack of personal choice in ancient Roman matrimonial life. Having accepted the pragmatic reality of your arranged marriage, your understanding of Roman matrimony is then confronted by another, particularly jarring truth. Young brides' childhood lost. Forget modern notions of adolescence and choosing your own path. In ancient Rome, girls could be legally married at a shockingly tender age, far too young for emotional maturity or a full understanding of their new responsibilities, effectively stripping them of their childhood and thrusting them prematurely into the demanding role of a Roman wife. You quickly learn that your journey from girlhood to wifehood is not a gradual transition, but a sudden, abrupt plunge, leaving behind playmates and youthful innocence for the weighty expectations of a household and the immediate pressure of childbearing. It's like being forced to grow up overnight. But your new responsibilities include managing a large household and bearing children for a man who might be old enough to be your grandfather. You are a Roman girl, perhaps just 12 years old, or barely 13. Your body is still developing, your mind still filled with the simple joys of childhood games, and your understanding of the world largely confined to the domestic sphere. But suddenly, those hushed conversations about your arranged marriage, remember those from Section 2, culminate in a concrete decision: you are to be wed. Your playmates, other girls your age, might also be facing similar prospects, or perhaps they've already been married off. The transition from Puella girl to matrona married woman is swift and irreversible. One mainstream historical fact that utterly redefines the concept of childhood in ancient Rome is that Roman girls could legally marry at the age of 12 with boys at 14. And while actual marriage ages varied, many Roman girls, particularly among the elite, were indeed married in their early to mid-teens, forcing them into adult roles of household management and childbearing prematurely, often without emotional maturity or preparation. This early marriage age was a common and accepted practice. Think about it. You're barely old enough for middle school, but you're already a wife. Imagine your last days as a child. You might offer up your childhood toys, your doll, or your girl's tunic to the household gods Lares, a symbolic farewell to your innocence, a ritual marking your passage into womanhood. The seriousness of the impending marriage looms large, overshadowing any remaining moments of youthful abandon. Your mother and female relatives would meticulously prepare you, not just with a bridal gown and veil, but with solemn instructions on your duties as a wife, obedience to your husband, managing the household, and the ultimate expectation of bearing children. A particularly quirky tidbit that highlights the stark contrast between their age and their expected role is the common Roman ideal of a univira, a woman who had only one husband in her lifetime, even if she became a widow. This ideal, while difficult to achieve given high mortality rates and early marriage, placed immense pressure on young brides to embody purity and lifelong dedication, even if their first marriage was to a man significantly older than them, who might die young. Imagine being married as a preteen, and societal expectations then demand that you remain loyal to that single marriage for your entire life, even after your husband is gone. Historians still argue whether the practice of early marriage for Roman girls primarily served a pragmatic purpose in a society with high mortality rates, ensuring women had many productive childbearing years, contributing to demographic stability, or if it was predominantly a tool of patriarchal control, removing girls from their paterfamilia's direct authority and placing them under their husband's control at a young, impressionable age, thus minimizing their independent development or pursuit of education. Was it about population or control that made brides so young? The new reality of your life hits almost immediately. You are now responsible for managing a Roman household, which, depending on your husband's status, could be a large, complex undertaking with numerous enslaved individuals. You are expected to oversee the daily chores, manage the supplies, and ensure the smooth running of the home. Your formal education, if you had any, which was likely limited. Remember those Greek schools, no girls allowed. Section 6 now ceases, replaced by the practical demands of domesticity. But the most immediate and profound expectation placed upon you as a young bride is childbearing. The primary purpose of marriage was to produce legitimate children, especially sons, to carry on the family name and inheritance. This pressure would be intense, leading to a relentless cycle of pregnancies, often from a very young age, as soon as your body was physically capable. You would live with the constant anxiety of conception, pregnancy, and the terrifying dangers of ancient childbirth, which we'll explore in the next sections. Your husband, perhaps a man of 25 or 30, views you as his new wife, his property, and the vessel for his lineage. The age gap often means a significant power imbalance, and any personal affection or love may develop slowly, if at all, as your relationship is rooted in contract and duty. Your previous life, your childhood games, your innocent dreams, they are gone, abruptly replaced by the solemn responsibilities of marriage and the heavy expectations of a Roman matrona. Long before you are truly ready, you feel the heavy weight of your bridal veil, the unfamiliar responsibility settling on your young shoulders, and the profound, chilling realization that your childhood has abruptly ended. You look at your new husband, a figure of authority and, potentially, a stranger, and you begin your new life. The awful truth about love and marriage for Roman women isn't about the grand ceremonies. It's about the shocking reality of young brides. Your childhood is tragically cut short, replaced by the demanding role of a wife and the immediate pressure of childbearing, ensuring that your earliest entry into womanhood was a sudden, often terrifying, plunge into a world of adult expectations and profound lack of personal agency. A constant reminder of the societal priorities that dictated a Roman woman's destiny. Having just left behind the abrupt end of your childhood, you quickly discover that your value in a Roman marriage extends far beyond your youth and your potential for childbearing. Instead, it is inextricably linked to a cold, hard financial reality. Dowry property, not passion. Forget wedding gifts chosen with love or shared financial futures. In ancient Rome, the dowry, a significant transfer of wealth from the bride's family to the groom's, was a crucial, defining element of the marriage contract, determining a woman's desirability, her status within the marriage, and her financial security. You quickly learn that your personal qualities might be appreciated, but your true worth in the marital market is meticulously calculated in terms of assets, turning your very being into a financial instrument in your family's strategic calculations. It's like being a very expensive piece of real estate, where your entire value is determined by how much your family is willing to invest in your transfer. You are present during the premarital negotiations. Remember those from Section 2, Arranged Marriages. The air is thick not with romantic anticipation, but with the dry, hushed tones of financial discussions. Your paterfamilias father or male guardian is meticulously detailing the assets that will be transferred as your dowry. Your dowry. This could be a significant sum of money, valuable land, enslaved individuals, or precious goods. Its size is a direct reflection of your family's wealth and prestige, and crucially, it often determines the caliber of husband you can attract. A larger dowry could secure a more prominent, wealthier, or politically influential husband, regardless of your personal charms. One mainstream historical fact that utterly defines the transactional nature of Roman marriage is that the dowry dues was a legally and socially essential financial contribution made by the bride's family to the groom upon marriage, intended to help support the wife within the marriage and to provide for her in case of divorce or widowhood. With its size significantly impacting a woman's perceived value, social standing, and desirability as a wife. The dowry was a crucial economic pillar of Roman marriage. Think about it. Your family literally pays a large sum for you to get married, and that sum sets your status. Imagine the negotiations. Your family might spend years accumulating this wealth, carefully saving and investing to ensure you have a respectable dowry. Its presentation is a public declaration of your family's prosperity, and a guarantee of your standing within the marriage. If your dowry was small or absent, your marriage prospects would be significantly limited, potentially forcing you into a union with a man of lower status, or, for the truly impoverished, condemning you to a life without the social security of marriage, perhaps even into prostitution, a grim reality, as we saw in The Disturbing Underworld of Ancient Pompeii. Section 3, a particularly quirky tidbit that highlights the legal complexities and the constant concern over financial assets surrounding the dowry, is that while it was given to the husband for the duration of the marriage, it legally remained the wife's property, or rather, the property of her pater familias. The husband was generally obligated to return the dowry if the marriage ended in divorce, especially if he was at fault or upon the wife's death without children, though often in installments and sometimes with legal battles. Imagine your husband technically owning your vast family fortune while you're married, but knowing that if he divorces you, he has to give it back. What a complicated system of trust and legal obligation. Historians still argue whether the dowry system, by legally protecting a woman's underlying financial interests through her pater familias and providing a potential source of personal wealth in case of marital breakdown, inadvertently offered Roman women a significant degree of financial autonomy and leverage within the marriage, giving them more power than women in many other ancient societies. Or if it primarily reinforced patriarchal control, allowing families to retain influence over their daughters' lives and assets, effectively making the woman herself a valuable piece of property in a financial transaction. Did it empower women, or just reinforce their status as assets? The dowry was not just a sum of money. It often included land, houses, enslaved individuals, and precious goods. Its management by the husband was a serious responsibility, as he was expected to invest it wisely and return it if the marriage dissolved. Disputes over dowries were common in Roman courts, a clear sign of their immense financial significance. Your entire financial future, your security, and your ability to maintain a respectable lifestyle, particularly if your husband died or if the marriage failed, were inextricably linked to the size and security of your dowry. For you, the young bride, remember those childhood lost realities from Section 3. The dowry represents your family's investment in your future, a tangible expression of their hopes and expectations. You carry the weight of this financial contribution, knowing that your success as a wife, primarily through childbearing your immediate responsibility, as we'll discuss next, reflects directly on your family's wisdom in investing such a significant asset. You feel the subtle pressure of the financial agreement, the unspoken understanding that your value is, in large part, determined by the wealth you bring to the union. You see the glint of coin, the rustle of contracts, and the serious faces of the men discussing your future, and you realize that love, if it exists, is a mere footnote to the meticulous financial calculations. The awful truth about love and marriage for Roman women isn't about romantic ideals. It's about the stark, pragmatic reality of the dowry. Your worth is meticulously calculated in terms of property, transforming your entry into matrimony into a profound economic transaction, ensuring that your financial value was often more important than your emotional desires. A constant reminder that even in marriage, a Roman woman was often defined by her assets, a valuable piece of her family's strategic property, exchanged not with passion, but with a precise, cold calculation of wealth. Having entered marriage with a dowry as your financial anchor, your next daily reality as a Roman wife immediately becomes clear husband's authority, pater familias. Forget modern notions of equal partnership or shared decision-making. In ancient Rome, your husband, as the pater familias, head of his household, wielded immense, often absolute, legal power over you, your children, and everyone else within his domain. You quickly learn that your life, your decisions, and your very autonomy are largely subject to his will, turning your marriage into a state of legal subordination where your obedience is expected, and his word is, quite literally, law. It's like living under a benevolent dictator, where your every move is subject to his approval, and any defiance could lead to severe consequences, with no one to appeal to. You live in your husband's home, the same grand villa or modest house where you now preside as its mistress. But while you manage the domestic sphere, overseeing enslaved individuals and daily chores, remember that women's labor endless toil from the Viking Age. Roman women had similar domestic burdens, but under a husband's legal control, your husband's authority extends over every aspect of your public and private life. His decisions are final. His word, within his household, is supreme. One mainstream historical fact that utterly defines the Roman patriarchal structure is that the pater familias, father of the family, held near absolute legal authority. Patria potestas over all members of his household, including his wife, especially in cum manu marriages, but even largely in sin manu, his children, and his enslaved individuals, giving him legal control over their property, actions, and even their lives, making the Roman wife legally subordinate to her husband. This sweeping legal power meant wives had limited independent legal standing. Think about it. Your husband literally has the power of life and death over you. Theoretically, imagine the limitations on your freedom. You cannot engage in most business transactions without your husband's consent or direct involvement. You cannot initiate legal proceedings in your own name without his permission unless under very specific, rare circumstances. Your public movements, your social interactions, even your choice of attire, might be subject to his approval, particularly for respectable women who were expected to uphold their husband's honor through their modesty and conduct. Your role is primarily domestic, to manage the household and, crucially, to bear legitimate children for your husband. A particularly quirky tidbit that highlights the extreme nature of this authority, though rarely exercised in its fullest extent, is the ius vitae nescisque, right of life and death, which the pater familias technically held over his children, and in some forms, over his wife. While direct killing was extremely rare and severely frowned upon, the pater familias could, in theory, punish family members severely, including ordering their execution, though such extreme measures were virtually unheard of in practice for wives in the later Republic and Empire. Imagine your husband literally holding the legal right to decide if you live or die, even if he never actually acts on it. But the power is always there. Historians still argue whether the formal legal authority of the pater familias, despite its theoretical absoluteness, was often softened in daily practice by social customs, mutual affection, and the practical necessities of household management, giving Roman wives more informal influence and agency than the law alone suggests, or if its very existence as a legal framework always served as a tool of ultimate control and potential oppression, regardless of how rarely its harsher aspects were invoked. Was it a legal reality, or just a rarely exercised threat? Your dowry, while legally yours or your father's, in sine manu marriages, remember that, from Section 4, is managed by your husband. He has the right to use its income for the household's expenses, and while he is generally obligated to return it if the marriage dissolves, his mismanagement or deliberate squandering of it could leave you financially vulnerable. Your security, even with a dowry, rests on his financial prudence and his goodwill. Disputes within the household are ultimately resolved by your husband. If an enslaved person misbehaves, if your children are disobedient, or if you have a disagreement, his word is final. He is the ultimate arbiter of all matters within his domain, his authority unquestioned. His power is both formal, backed by Roman law, and informal, enforced by social expectation and the sheer power imbalance of your relationship. Your primary duty, beyond managing the household, is to produce legitimate children for your husband, especially sons, to carry on his family name and inheritance. Remember that pressure on young brides. Section 3. Your value as a wife is often measured by your fertility and your ability to provide heirs. Any failure in this regard could lead to disappointment, pressure, or even divorce, which we'll explore next. You feel the constant weight of your husband's legal authority, the subtle constraints on your freedom, and the profound realization that your life, however luxurious, is ultimately not your own. You nod, assent, and defer, understanding that your obedience is expected, and any challenge could lead to severe consequences. The awful truth about love and marriage for Roman women isn't about romantic ideals. It's about the stark, pervasive reality of your husband's absolute authority as paterfamilias. Your marriage transforms you into a legally subordinate figure, your choices limited, your autonomy curtailed, ensuring that your dignified life was lived under a pervasive shadow of male control, a constant reminder that even in your own home, you were perpetually bound by the will of your Roman husband, even within the confines of your husband's absolute authority. A surprising, yet often devastating, legal reality existed for Roman women. Divorce easy, unequal, forget the lengthy, contentious legal battles and social stigma of later eras. In ancient Rome, ending a marriage could be remarkably simple, initiated by either husband or wife. But the consequences for the woman, particularly regarding her children and reputation, were often profoundly unequal and emotionally crushing. You quickly learn that while freedom from an unhappy union was legally accessible, it often came at the cost of profound personal loss and social uncertainty, turning a simple legal act into a potential life-shattering event. It's like being able to walk away from a contract with ease, but realizing that walking away means leaving behind your entire life, and your children might not come with you. You sit in your villa, perhaps experiencing growing tension in your marriage. Your husband might be abusive, or simply neglectful. Perhaps he has failed in his financial duties, or you have simply fallen out of favor with his family. The option of divorce, while not without social consequences, is legally available. This stands in stark contrast to many other ancient societies, where divorce was either impossible for women to initiate or carried immense penalties. One mainstream historical fact that utterly contrasts with many historical and modern divorce norms is that Roman marriage, particularly sine manu marriage, which became common, could be easily dissolved by either the husband or the wife, often through a simple declaration of intent to separate, without needing formal legal proceedings or judicial approval. Though the practical and social consequences for women, especially regarding children and financial security, if the dowry was mismanaged, were often devastating and unequal. The legal ease of divorce did not always translate to personal ease. Think about it. Your marriage could end with a single sentence, at any moment. Imagine initiating a divorce. If you are the wife, you would typically declare your intent to leave your husband. This could be done by simply packing your bags and returning to your paterfamilias, your father or male guardian, under whose legal control you remained in sine manu marriages. However, the real complexity and the source of immense hardship lay in the aftermath. Your primary concern would be your dowry, Remember that crucial property, not passion, from Section 4. Your husband was legally obligated to return it, but this often involved lengthy disputes, partial payments, or outright refusal, leaving you in a precarious financial position. A particularly quirky tidbit that highlights the pragmatic, yet brutal side of Roman divorce is the emphasis on returning the dowry. If the husband was at fault for the divorce, e.g., through misconduct or financial mismanagement, he was often legally obligated to return the dowry in installments, sometimes stretching over years. This effectively meant that a husband might suffer financially for his misdeeds, even if the wife suffered personally. Imagine getting divorced, and your husband has to pay you back in installments, potentially for years, and he might even try to avoid it by arguing about your conduct. Historians still argue whether the Roman legal ease of divorce, by providing a pathway for both men and women to exit unhappy or unproductive unions, inadvertently offered women a significant degree of agency and personal freedom within a patriarchal society, allowing them to escape intolerable situations. Or if its practical realities like losing children and struggling for dowry return primarily favored men, who faced fewer social and personal repercussions, making it ultimately an unequal liberation. Did it empower women, or just offer a limited escape? The most devastating consequence for a Roman woman in a divorce was almost always the loss of her children. Children, regardless of who initiated the divorce or who was at fault, almost invariably remained in the legal custody of the father, as they belonged to his familia. You, the mother, would be separated from your beloved sons and daughters, perhaps allowed only occasional visits, if any. This emotional amputation was a crushing blow, transforming your maternal role into a source of profound, ongoing grief. Your biological connection meant little in the face of legal custom. Your reputation, too, could suffer, especially if you were perceived as the initiator of the divorce without strong justification. While divorce was common, public opinion could still judge a woman who left her husband, potentially impacting her future marriage prospects or her social standing. For the husband, particularly an elite one, divorce was often less socially damaging, and he could quickly remarry. For women without a strong paterfamilias to protect their interests or advocate for the return of their dowry, divorce could lead to destitution, forcing them into precarious circumstances, potentially even into prostitution, a grim reality. As we saw in The Disturbing Underworld of Ancient Pompeii, Section 3, or in The Awful Jobs You Had in Ancient Rome. Section 11. Your financial security was tenuous, your social standing fragile, and your emotional well-being often shattered. You feel the cold weight of the legal pronouncement, the profound sadness of leaving your children, and the stark uncertainty of your future. You walk away from your husband's home, technically free, but carrying a heavy burden of loss and precariousness. The awful truth about love and marriage for Roman women isn't about eternal commitment. It's about the surprising, yet often devastating, reality of divorce. Your marriage, a strategic alliance, could end with shocking ease, but the personal price, particularly the loss of your children and the struggle for financial security, transformed a simple legal act into a profound, often unequal, and emotionally crushing ordeal, ensuring that even freedom came with a heavy cost, a constant reminder that in ancient Rome, true marital partnership was a rare ideal, and ending a union was a perilous journey, especially for the woman. Even if you somehow navigated the legal complexities of divorce or chose to remain in a difficult marriage, your primary and most terrifying purpose as a Roman wife constantly loomed: childbearing life's greatest risk. Forget comfortable hospital deliveries, pain relief, or skilled obstetricians. In ancient Rome, bringing a new life into the world was an incredibly dangerous, agonizing, and often fatal ordeal, placing your body and your very existence in profound peril with every pregnancy. You quickly learn that your most fundamental role as a wife is also the gravest threat to your life, turning every new hope of progeny into a terrifying gamble with your own mortality. It's like being forced to cross a minefield repeatedly, knowing that every step could be your last, all for the chance of holding a tiny new life in your arms. You find yourself in your birthing chamber, perhaps a room within your own home, or a designated space within the household. The air is thick with anticipation, fear, and the faint scent of herbs. Around you, women of your household, older female relatives, trusted enslaved women, and a local midwife gather, their faces grim but determined. There are no male doctors, present a strong social taboo, as we might recall from that horrifying childbirth practices of the Middle Ages script. Your only support comes from these women, whose knowledge is based on generations of anecdotal experience, often mixed with superstition, rather than scientific understanding. One mainstream historical fact that utterly defines the terrifying reality of a Roman woman's life is that childbirth was by far the leading cause of death for Roman women of childbearing age, characterized by high rates of maternal mortality due to complications like hemorrhage, infection, prolonged labor, and the complete absence of modern medical interventions, making every pregnancy a life-threatening event. Your biological purpose was inherently life-threatening. Think about it, the most common way for a Roman woman to die was simply by giving birth. Imagine the agonizing pain. Labor could last for hours, even days, a relentless wave of contractions that push your body to its absolute limits. There is no effective pain relief beyond perhaps some mild herbal concoctions. A swig of diluted wine, remember that from What Parties Were Like in the Roman Empire. Section 5. Or simply gritting your teeth and enduring the torment. Your energy drains with every passing moment. Your strength slowly consumed by the immense physical demands. A particularly quirky tidbit that reflects the desperation and superstition surrounding Roman childbirth is the use of various amulets, charms, and invocations to specific goddesses like Juno Lucina, goddess of childbirth, or Diana to ease labor and protect the mother and child. Some women might even wear special knotted cords around their body, believing that by untying them during labor, it would symbolically unhinder the birth. Imagine trying to give birth, and your primary medical intervention is a magical knot, hoping it helps unlock your body for the process. Historians still argue whether the Roman emphasis on natural, unhindered childbirth, with minimal medical intervention, was primarily a practical adaptation to the severe limitations of ancient medical knowledge, as intervention often caused more harm than good, or if it also reflected a cultural and religious belief that childbirth was a divine process, best left to the will of the gods and the natural strength of the woman's body, making excessive interference inappropriate. Was it pragmatic or pious that dictated their approach to birth? Complications were common and often fatal. Postpartum hemorrhage, uncontrolled bleeding after childbirth, was a swift and brutal killer. Without modern blood transfusions or understanding of clotting, a woman could bleed to death in minutes or hours. Puerperal fever, a deadly infection contracted after delivery. Often from unhygienic conditions, remember that general filth and body odor from Why You Wouldn't Survive a Day in Ancient Egypt. Section 3. Or unwashed hands of attendants, would sweep through new mothers, causing high fevers, sepsis, and agonizing death in the days or weeks following birth. Your very recovery room could be a death trap, prolonged labor, where the baby was simply too large or positioned incorrectly, could lead to exhaustion, internal injuries, and death for both mother and child. There was no concept of a cesarean section as a life-saving procedure for the mother in ancient Rome. It was almost exclusively performed post-mortem to save the baby, or in rare cases, when the mother was already on the verge of death. The choice was not between methods of delivery, but often between who would survive. If anyone, you feel the overwhelming pain, the profound exhaustion, and the chilling realization that your body is locked in a desperate battle, not just for your own life, but for the life of the child within you. You hear the strained whispers of the women around you, their prayers for your survival, their grim understanding of the immense peril. The awful truth about love and marriage for Roman women isn't about romantic ideals. It's about the terrifying reality of childbearing. Your life, your health, and your very existence are constantly gambling with death, transforming every pregnancy into a perilous journey, ensuring that your most fundamental role as a Roman wife was also your greatest and most terrifying risk. A constant reminder of the immense biological cost of perpetuating the Roman family line. Even if you miraculously survived the agonizing torment of childbirth itself, the immediate aftermath often presented a silent, yet equally devastating, threat. Maternal mortality, silent scourge. Forget a healthy recovery and joyous new parenthood. In ancient Rome, the days and weeks following delivery were fraught with hidden dangers, transforming the perceived triumph of birth into a perilous period where complications often led to a slow, agonizing, and frequently fatal decline. You quickly learn that even after the ordeal of labor, your body remains a fragile vessel, vulnerable to unseen killers that could snatch away your life, leaving your newborn motherless, and your family in profound grief. It's like crossing a treacherous river, only to drown in the shallow waters on the other side. You lie in your birthing chamber, exhausted but perhaps relieved, a newborn wailing softly beside you. The immense physical exertion of labor has left your body weak, your muscles aching, and your strength utterly depleted. The atmosphere, initially filled with the relief of a successful birth, gradually becomes tinged with a subtle, yet pervasive, anxiety. This isn't just about recovering, it's about surviving the hidden perils that so often claimed Roman mothers in the postpartum period. One mainstream historical fact that utterly defines this tragic reality is that maternal mortality rates in ancient Rome were exceptionally high, with a significant percentage of women dying during or in the weeks immediately following childbirth due to complications like postpartum hemorrhage, uncontrolled bleeding, puerperal fever, sepsis, infection, or exhaustion-related issues, making childbirth the single greatest risk to a Roman woman's life during her reproductive years. This silent scourge decimated female populations and frequently left newborns without mothers. Think about it, surviving childbirth was only half the battle. The other half was surviving the next few weeks. Imagine the onset of puerperal fever, or childbed fever. A few days after delivery, you might feel a sudden chill, followed by a spiking fever, extreme weakness, and profound pain. This terrifying infection, caused by bacteria introduced during delivery from unhygienic practices, remember the overall hygiene, filth, and body odor from Why You Wouldn't Survive a Day in Ancient Egypt. Section 3, or from unwashed hands of attendants, midwives, and enslaved women. Recall that from horrifying childbirth practices of the Middle Ages. Section 7, which also dealt with lack of hygiene, would sweep rapidly through your body. Your internal organs would become inflamed, your mind delirious with fever, and your strength would quickly ebb away. A particularly quirky tidbit that reflects the desperation and lack of understanding surrounding puerperal fever is the common belief that such fevers were caused by bad air or malevolent spirits entering the birthing chamber, leading to remedies like burning fragrant herbs, airing out the room, which might inadvertently help slightly, or performing protective rituals rather than focusing on actual cleanliness. Imagine your recovery depending on whether your midwife remembered to burn enough rosemary, when what you actually needed was sterile instruments and clean hands. Historians still argue whether the extreme rates of maternal mortality from puerperal fever were primarily due to the complete absence of germ theory and antiseptic practices, making infection almost inevitable in crowded environments with direct contact, or if other factors like widespread anemia from poor nutrition and the general physical exhaustion of frequent pregnancies also significantly predisposed Roman women to fatal postpartum infections, even with basic hygiene attempts. Was it ubiquitous germs or underlying weakness that proved more fatal? Postpartum hemorrhage, uncontrolled bleeding after childbirth, was another swift and brutal killer. Without modern medical interventions like blood transfusions or drugs to stimulate uterine contractions, a Roman woman could bleed to death in minutes or hours after delivery. The midwife, with her limited tools and knowledge, could do little more than apply crude compresses or offer prayers, watching helplessly as life drained away. You might feel a sudden gush of warmth, a profound weakness, and then a terrifying darkness encroaching, signaling a rapid decline from which there was no recovery. Even less dramatic complications, like retained placental fragments or minor internal tears, could become life-threatening in an era without surgical intervention or antibiotics. These could lead to chronic infections, ongoing pain, and a slow, wasting decline that left women permanently debilitated or eventually claimed their lives months after childbirth. The emotional toll on families was immense. A successful birth, usually a cause for celebration, could quickly turn into profound grief, leaving a husband a widower and, most tragically, a newborn without a mother. The impact on the infant, often deprived of breast milk and maternal care. Remember the importance of mothers for infants, from horrifying childbirth practices of the Middle Ages. Section 10 significantly reduced its chances of survival in the perilous world of ancient Roman childhood. You feel the persistent ache in your body, the occasional shivers, and the profound, chilling realization that even after bringing forth a new life, your own is still in immense peril. You try to rest, to recover, but the constant awareness of the unseen threats, the knowledge of how many women simply faded away after delivery, leaves you perpetually on edge. The awful truth about love and marriage for Roman women isn't just about the terrors of childbirth. It's about the brutal reality of maternal mortality. Your very purpose as a wife, to bear children, transformed every pregnancy into a harrowing gamble, and every birth into a precarious period of recovery, ensuring that your most fundamental role in Roman society was also the single greatest, and most tragic, threat to your existence, making death a constant silent companion in the supposed triumph of new life. Even if you, the mother, miraculously survived the terrifying ordeal of childbirth and the perilous postpartum period, another heartbreaking, almost inevitable. Reality haunted every Roman family, infant mortality, constant grief. Forget the joyous celebrations of new life. In ancient Rome, the vast majority of children faced overwhelming odds against survival, succumbing to disease, malnutrition, or accidents in their earliest years, transforming the hopes of parenthood into a recurring cycle of profound sorrow and loss. You quickly learn that bringing a new life into the world is only the first step. Keeping it alive is a constant, desperate battle against unseen forces, and that the quiet agony of burying a child is a tragically common experience, etching an indelible mark on every family. It's like tending a delicate garden, knowing that most of your precious seedlings will simply wither and die before they can ever truly bloom. You sit by the cradle, a tiny form bundled in swaddling clothes. Your heart swells with love, but also with a gnawing anxiety. You watch their fragile breathing, listen for their cries, constantly vigilant for any sign of illness. The Roman world, as you've experienced it, is a harsh place, and for infants and young children, its dangers are amplified. From the moment they are born, they face an uphill battle for survival, and the odds are tragically stacked against them. One mainstream historical fact that utterly defines the grim reality of Roman family life is that infant and child mortality rates in ancient Rome were astronomically high, with estimates suggesting that between 25 to 50% of children did not survive past their first year, and many more died before reaching adolescence due to rampant infectious diseases, malnutrition, unhygienic conditions, and the lack of modern medical care. The loss of multiple children was a tragically common experience for Roman parents. Think about it. Half the children born might not live long enough to learn to walk. Imagine the subtle signs of illness: a persistent cough, a sudden fever, a loss of appetite, or recurring digestive issues, all those invisible killers from Section 6 of Why You Wouldn't Survive a Day in Ancient Egypt, exacerbated by contaminated food and water. Section 7. These common ailments, easily treated today, could quickly overwhelm a fragile infant's undeveloped immune system. Without antibiotics, vaccines, or even a basic understanding of germ theory, a simple infection could rapidly turn fatal. A particularly quirky tidbit that reflects the parents' desperate attempts to protect their children without scientific knowledge is the widespread use of various amulets and charms placed around children's necks or beds to ward off evil spirits, illness, or the evil eye. These could be small phallic symbols believed to be protective, miniature fasces, or other symbolic items. Imagine desperately tying a tiny good luck charm around your baby's wrist, believing it would protect them from a disease that a simple hand wash could prevent. Historians still argue whether the Roman parents' apparent emotional detachment from infants, as sometimes suggested by certain literary accounts or by the practice of only naming children after a period of survival, was a genuine reflection of a more stoic emotional landscape due to pervasive mortality, or if it was primarily a psychological coping mechanism, a necessary emotional shield developed by parents to protect themselves from the overwhelming grief of almost inevitable infant loss, masking a deep, profound love that could not afford to fully blossom until a child survived to a certain age. Was it detachment, or a coping strategy, that shaped their grief? The living conditions played a major role. Overcrowded homes, poor sanitation. Remember that filth and body odor from Section 3 of Why You Wouldn't Survive a Day in Ancient Egypt, contaminated water Section 4, and questionable food Section 5 all contributed to a constant pathogenic load that was particularly deadly for infants. Access to clean wet nurses for those who couldn't breastfeed or lost their mothers. Linking to maternal mortality. Section 8 was vital but often precarious, and alternatives to breast milk were unsanitary and nutritionally inadequate. The loss of a child was a profound emotional tragedy, though often privately grieved. You would mourn, but then, grimly, perhaps quickly, resume your efforts to conceive again, driven by the societal pressure to produce heirs, especially sons. For your husband, remember that childbearing life's greatest risk from Section 7. The cycle of hope, pregnancy, birth, and potential loss was a recurring, heartbreaking rhythm for many Roman women. You would see infant funerals, often simple and unceremonious. The tiny bodies quickly buried in common graves remember those corpse carriers from the awful jobs you had in ancient Rome. Section 10. The sheer frequency of these losses, while devastating, often led to a grim acceptance, a hardening of the spirit, as families simply had to carry on for the sake of the living. You feel the constant knot of anxiety in your stomach, the heightened vigilance over every breath your child takes, and the profound, aching sorrow that comes with the inevitable. You look at your child, their small hand clutching your finger, and you know, with chilling certainty, that their life is a fragile flicker against overwhelming odds. The awful truth about love and marriage for Roman women isn't just about the terrors of childbirth. It's about the heartbreaking reality of infant mortality. Your life as a Roman mother is a continuous cycle of profound grief, transforming the joyous hope of new life into a constant battle against unseen killers, ensuring that the love you feel for your children is perpetually shadowed by the overwhelming probability of tragic, early loss, a constant reminder of the immense emotional cost of perpetuating the Roman family line. Even as you, a Roman wife, grappled with the devastating grief of infant mortality and the relentless pressure of childbearing, another accepted, yet deeply uncomfortable. Reality often permeated Roman domestic life. Concubinage legalized mistresses. Forget exclusive marital bonds. In ancient Rome, it was common and socially acceptable for men, including your own husband, to maintain unofficial long-term sexual relationships with women who were not their wives, often enslaved individuals or freedwomen, creating a complex, often painful, dynamic within the household and society. You quickly learn that your husband's fidelity is not expected, and that your emotional security might be constantly undermined by the presence of a legalized mistress, turning your marital home into a place of subtle, yet profound, emotional discomfort and unspoken tension. It's like being in a marriage where an additional, official, but non-marital partner is not only allowed, but sometimes lives in your house, and everyone just pretends it's fine. You sit in your villa, perhaps overseeing your household duties, and you become aware of a particular woman among the enslaved household staff, or perhaps a freedwoman who frequents your husband's circle. Her status is ambiguous. She is not a wife, not a prostitute, though some concubines may have started that way, but a permanent, or long-term, sexual companion to your husband. Her presence might be discreet, or, depending on your husband's openness and your own tolerance, it might be an open secret within your home. This practice, known as concubinatus, was legally recognized and quite common, particularly among elite men who already had a formal wife. One mainstream historical fact that utterly contrasts with modern marital norms is that concubinage, where a Roman man maintained a long-term, informal, and legally recognized sexual relationship with a woman who was not his wife, often an enslaved woman or freedwoman, was a common and socially accepted practice in ancient Rome, particularly among the elite, providing an alternative to marriage for men who wish to avoid legal obligations or produce legitimate heirs. These relationships, while offering some stability for the woman compared to prostitution, still left her vulnerable and socially subordinate. Think about it. Your husband can essentially have a second partner living openly, and it's completely legal. Imagine the complexities for the woman in concubinage. If she was an enslaved woman, she had no choice in the matter. Her body was simply property to be used by her master. Remember that brutal reality from the awful jobs you had in ancient Rome. Section 6. If she was a freedwoman, concubinage might offer her a degree of financial security, protection, and social standing that she could not achieve otherwise, perhaps even leading to manumission for her children. However, her children by the man would be considered illegitimate, unable to inherit property or status from their father, and she herself had no legal claim on him or his property if the relationship ended. Her position was fundamentally precarious. A particularly quirky tidbit that highlights the distinct social rules for concubinage is that, unlike a formal marriage, a man could legally maintain a concubine even if he was already married, and often did. However, he generally could not have two legal marriages simultaneously. This created a clear social hierarchy. The wife held the official status and bore legitimate children, while the concubine provided companionship and sexual gratification without the same legal entanglements. Imagine your husband having a second family that's legally distinct from yours, and the law just shrugs and says it's fine. Historians still argue whether the widespread practice of concubinage in ancient Rome, by providing a flexible and socially acceptable outlet for male sexual desire outside of marriage, inadvertently contributed to the stability of formal marriage by relieving some pressure on wives to fulfill all marital roles, or if it primarily served to perpetuate the sexual exploitation of lower status women and reinforced the patriarchal control over women's bodies and reproductive choices, highlighting the deep gender inequalities in Roman society. Did it stabilize marriage or just exploit women? For you, the Roman wife, the presence of a concubine could be a source of profound emotional pain and humiliation. While societal norms accepted it, personal feelings of jealousy, resentment, and betrayal were undoubtedly common. You might tolerate her presence for the sake of marital harmony, your husband's desires, or to avoid divorce, which, as you know from Section 6, had its own devastating consequences. The power dynamic was clear. Your husband, as the paterfamilias, remember his absolute authority from Section 5, had the right to make such arrangements within his household. The children born from a concubine, while perhaps loved by their father, had no claim to his name or inheritance, their status fundamentally different from your legitimate children. This legal distinction was crucial, upholding the purity of the family lineage. You, as the wife, were responsible for producing legitimate heirs, ensuring the continuity of the familia, a responsibility that the concubine could not fulfill. You feel the subtle sting of emotional discomfort, the quiet resentment, and the constant awareness of a divided household. You maintain your composure, upholding your dignity, but the unspoken tension is a constant companion. The awful truth about love and marriage for Roman women isn't about romantic ideals, it's about the harsh reality of concubinage. Your marital life is often shadowed by the presence of a legalized mistress, transforming your home into a site of subtle emotional pain and profound gender inequality, ensuring that your husband's fidelity was not expected, and your own emotional security was perpetually undermined by the accepted realities of Roman male desire. A constant reminder that even in your own home, profound complexities of power and vulnerability existed beneath the veneer of societal acceptance. Even as you, a Roman wife, navigated the emotional complexities of concubinage and the general realities of your husband's non-exclusive marital expectations, Your own personal conduct was held to an entirely different and brutally unforgiving standard infidelity double standards. Forget any notion of mutual fidelity or equal consequences. In ancient Rome, a wife's adultery was a grave crime, punishable by severe penalties, including public disgrace, exile, or even death. While your husband's extramarital affairs with lower status women or prostitutes were not only tolerated but largely accepted, creating a profound, hypocritical imbalance in marital morality. You quickly learn that your virtue is rigorously policed, but your husband's is not, turning your personal conduct into a dangerous tightrope walk where a single misstep could lead to utter ruin, while he roams freely. It's like being forced to live under a very strict, one-way surveillance system, where every single one of your personal actions is recorded, but your partner's actions are entirely private and unchecked. You live in your husband's villa, constantly aware of the watchful eyes of family, neighbors, and even enslaved household members. The expectation for a respectable Roman wife, a matrona, is absolute chastity and unwavering fidelity to her husband. Your reputation, and by extension your family's honor, hinges entirely on your perceived virtue. Every action, every public appearance, every conversation is scrutinized. The air in your home, while seemingly serene, is also thick with the unspoken pressure of maintaining an impeccable moral facade. One mainstream historical fact that utterly defines this profound gender inequality is that Roman law and social custom enforced a severe double standard. Regarding marital fidelity, a wife's adultery was a grave criminal offense, punishable by severe penalties including forced divorce, banishment exile, confiscation of property, and sometimes even death. Whereas a husband's extramarital sexual relations with lower status women like enslaved individuals, freed women, or prostitutes were generally tolerated and not considered adultery under Roman law. This stark imbalance meant women bore the full burden of marital fidelity. Think about it, your husband can have concubines remember them from Section 10 or frequent prostitutes, and he's still considered a good, respectable Roman. But one lapse on your part could end your life. Imagine the consequences of being accused, a jealous relative, a vindictive husband, or even a watchful informant. Perhaps an enslaved individual hoping for manumission by exposing you could bring a charge of adultery. The legal proceedings would be public, humiliating, and agonizing. You would face your accusers, your reputation shredded, your family's honor dragged through the mud. The evidence might be circumstantial, but the societal bias against an accused woman would be immense. Your husband, meanwhile, might openly visit brothels recall those from the disturbing underworld of ancient Pompeii, Section 2 and 3, or the awful jobs you had in ancient Rome. Section 11, or maintain concubines, and it would be considered perfectly normal, even a sign of his virility, utterly exempt from legal or social condemnation for adultery. A particularly quirky tidbit that highlights the legal intricacies and inherent unfairness of Roman adultery laws is that under certain circumstances, a pater familias your father or male guardian. From Section 5, whose authority you might still be under in sin manu marriages, had the legal right to kill his adulterous daughter and her lover if caught in flagrante delicto in the act in his own home. While rare, this extreme legal provision underscored the absolute patriarchal control over female sexuality and the severity with which female infidelity was viewed, as it threatened the purity of the family lineage and inheritance. Imagine your own father having the legal right to kill you if you were caught cheating, all to preserve the family name. Historians still argue whether the extreme severity of Roman adultery laws for women was primarily designed to protect the male lineage and ensure legitimate heirs, reflecting a pragmatic concern for property and inheritance in a patriarchal society, or if it also served as a tool for asserting social control over women's bodies and behavior, reinforcing rigid gender roles and limiting female autonomy beyond the domestic sphere. Was it about lineage or control that made infidelity so dangerous for women? The punishment for a convicted adulteress was devastating. You would face forced divorce, losing custody of your children. Remember that heartbreaking reality from Section 6's Divorce Easy Unequal, who would remain with your husband. Your dowry from Section 4 would likely be confiscated or returned to your paterfamilias at a reduced rate, leaving you financially destitute. You could be banished to a remote island, a form of exile, stripped of your social status, and forbidden from remarrying or attending public events. Your life, once privileged, would be utterly ruined, a constant testament to your perceived moral failing, the constant pressure of maintaining absolute fidelity, the fear of false accusations, and the knowledge of the devastating consequences for a single transgression, while your husband enjoys complete sexual freedom, creates a profound psychological burden. You live in a constant state of vigilance, your own desires suppressed, your every action scrutinized, knowing that your virtue is your most fragile, yet vital, possession. You feel the cold weight of the societal double standard, the profound injustice that burns in your gut, and the terrifying knowledge that your future hangs by the thread of your perceived chastity. You walk through the forum, observing men who openly frequent prostitutes, their reputations untarnished, and you realize the profound hypocrisy of the world you inhabit. The awful truth about love and marriage for Roman women isn't just about arranged unions or childbirth. It's about the brutal reality of infidelity's double standards. Your life is consumed by the constant policing of your virtue, transforming your every personal choice into a dangerous gamble, ensuring that your emotional security was perpetually undermined by a system that demanded absolute fidelity from you, but offered none in return, a constant reminder of the profound gender inequality that defined your existence in ancient Rome. Even if you managed to navigate the perilous double standards of fidelity, your life as a respectable Roman wife was defined by another subtle, yet pervasive, form of confinement: social isolation, domestic sphere. Forget the bustling public life, the political forums, or the wide-ranging intellectual pursuits open to Roman men. Your world, as a matrona, was largely confined to the household, your social interactions meticulously curated, and your intellectual development often limited to what served your domestic duties. You quickly learn that your virtue and honor are inextricably linked to your withdrawal from public life, turning your magnificent villa into a gilded cage where your sphere of influence, though important, is largely unseen and unheard by the wider world. It's like living in a beautiful, opulent palace, but your entire existence is confined to the staff entrance, and your only view of the outside world is through a tiny, latticed window. You rise each morning in your husband's villa, your day meticulously structured around household management. You oversee the enslaved staff, ensuring the smooth running of the household, managing provisions, and directing the education of your younger children boys until about age 7 girls for longer. The sounds of domestic activity fill your home, the murmur of servants, the clatter from the kitchen. Remember those brazier cook conditions from The Awful Jobs You Had in Ancient Rome. Section 12. And the quiet hum of household chores. This is your domain, a powerful one within its walls, but a domain that rarely extends beyond your doorstep. One mainstream historical fact that utterly contrasts with modern notions of public engagement for women is that respectable Roman women matronae were largely expected to confine their activities to the domestic sphere domus, with their public appearances limited and their direct participation in politics, law, and most intellectual forums like philosophical schools or public debates almost entirely absent, reflecting a deeply patriarchal societal ideal of female modesty and domesticity. Their virtue was often defined by their unseen, quiet presence within the home. Think about it. Your entire social standing depends on how little public life you engage in. Imagine your public outings. They are carefully selected and typically for specific purposes, visiting family members, attending religious ceremonies or festivals. Remember those mass merriment. Public festivals from What Parties Were Like in the Roman Empire. Section 13. Going to the baths. Though sometimes in separate sections or at different hours from men, or visiting a friend, you would often be accompanied by enslaved attendants or male relatives, particularly if you were a wealthy woman. Your presence discreet, your movements modest. Lingering in public spaces, engaging in extensive conversation with unrelated men, or frequenting the bustling forum would be seen as immodest, potentially damaging your reputation. Remember how important reputation was, from Why Justice Sucked in the Middle Ages. Section 2 and 8. A particularly quirky tidbit that highlights the emphasis on domesticity is the praise often bestowed upon Roman women for their skill in spinning and weaving wool. Even wealthy matrons were expected to engage in this activity, symbolically demonstrating their industriousness and dedication to the household, embodying the ideal of the modest, hard-working Roman wife. Imagine a modern CEO's wife being praised for knitting all her family's sweaters as a sign of her virtue. Historians still argue whether the Roman ideal of female domesticity, by placing emphasis on household management and family duties, genuinely empowered women within their designated sphere, granting them significant authority and practical influence over their large households, or if it was primarily a tool of patriarchal control, deliberately limiting women's intellectual, political, and public development to maintain male dominance and reinforce traditional gender roles. Did it give women power, or just confine them? Your intellectual pursuits, if you had any, were also largely confined to the private sphere. While some elite Roman women were literate and might engage in reading, writing letters, or even philosophical discussions with tutors within their homes, they were generally not expected to pursue higher education like that in ancient Greece, where no girls allowed was the rule. Section 6, or engage in public intellectual discourse. Your learning was meant to serve your domestic duties, your ability to raise educated children, and to be a pleasant, cultured companion for your husband within the home. The rich world of Roman law, politics, and philosophy, which consumed the lives of educated men, largely remained outside your direct participation. Your social circle, beyond your immediate family, would primarily consist of other respectable matronae, visited in private settings. You would exchange gossip, discuss household matters, share news of your children, and perhaps discuss the latest literary works that you might have read or had read to you by an enslaved reader. This female social network was important for support and companionship, but it rarely extended into the public, political, or intellectual arenas dominated by men. You feel the subtle constraints on your movements, the unspoken expectations on your behavior, and the profound realization that your value is intrinsically linked to your presence and virtue within the private walls of your home. You maintain your composure, conduct your duties, and navigate the intricate social dance of your limited public life, always aware of the watchful eyes. The awful truth about love and marriage for Roman women isn't just about arranged unions or fidelity. It's about the pervasive reality of social isolation. Your life, however privileged, is largely confined to the domestic sphere, transforming your existence into a gilded cage of modesty and virtue, ensuring that your influence, though crucial to the household, remained largely unseen and unacknowledged by the grand public narrative of the Roman Empire, a constant reminder of the profound limitations placed upon respectable women. Even if you, a Roman wife, diligently adhered to the strictures of the domestic sphere and flawlessly navigated the double standards of fidelity, your marital journey could still end abruptly, plunging you into a new, complex, and often precarious existence. Widowhood, precarious freedom. Forget a serene retirement or guaranteed security. For a Roman widow, the death of her husband brought a paradoxical mix of newfound autonomy and immense vulnerability, transforming her life into a delicate balancing act between potential independence and renewed societal pressures. You quickly learn that while you might finally be free from your husband's patria potestas, that freedom often came with loneliness, financial uncertainty, and the constant threat of being remarried against your will. It's like being released from a very comfortable, very restrictive prison, only to find yourself in a vast, open landscape where you're suddenly in charge of your own survival, and everyone else has an opinion on what you should do next. You stand in mourning, clad in dark robes, grieving the loss of your husband. The initial shock and profound sadness are immense, but beneath the layers of grief, a new reality begins to assert itself. With your husband gone, you are, for the first time, not directly subject to the patria potestas absolute legal authority of a male head of household. If your own pater familias was still alive, you might revert to his legal control sine manu marriage. Remember that from the intro. Section 1. But if he was deceased, or if you were in a cum manu marriage where you passed into your husband's family, and now his authority is gone, you might become sui juris, of your own right, legally independent, a rare and powerful status for a Roman woman. One mainstream historical fact that utterly contrasts with modern notions of a widow's immediate vulnerability is that Roman widows, particularly those who were sui juris legally independent and possessed their dowry or inherited wealth, could wield significant financial and social power, managing their own estates, engaging in business, and making independent decisions, a degree of autonomy rarely afforded to married women in ancient Rome. This newfound freedom was a unique aspect of Roman widowhood, making it a potentially powerful status. Think about it suddenly. You're in charge of your own money, and no man tells you what to do. Imagine the newfound freedoms. You could, potentially, manage your own property, invest your dowry. Remember that vital property, not passion, from Section 4, and make your own financial decisions without needing a male guardian's explicit consent. You could conduct business, engage in trade, and even influence political affairs indirectly through your social connections and wealth. For a woman who spent her life under male authority, her father's, then her husband's, this newfound legal independence could be exhilarating, a rare taste of true autonomy in a patriarchal society. A particularly quirky tidbit that demonstrates this unique blend of freedom and ongoing societal expectation is the Roman state's occasional attempts to encourage or even force widows to remarry. Particularly younger women with substantial dowries or childbearing potential, especially if they had few legitimate children. Recall Section 7's Childbearing Life's Greatest Risk and Section 9's Infant Mortality. laws might be passed that penalized unmarried widows, like Augustus's Lex Papia Poppaea, making them less desirable for inheritance or social status, pushing them back into marriage. Imagine being legally encouraged, or even pressured, to remarry, simply because the state wants you to produce more children or consolidate wealth. Historians still argue whether the apparent autonomy of Roman widows was primarily a genuine outcome of their legal status and economic control, reflecting a subtle pathway for female empowerment within Roman society, or if it was often illusory, with widows still subject to immense social pressures from their families to remarry strategically, or facing legal limitations like guardianship requirements for sui juris women, even if technically independent, that limited their true freedom. Was it genuine freedom, or a carefully managed illusion? However, this freedom was often precarious and came with its own set of dangers. If you had no children, especially sons, or if your dowry had been mismanaged or lost a constant struggle. Remember that from Section 4 and the complexities of divorce easy, unequal. Section 6. Your financial security could be tenuous. You might be dependent on your deceased husband's male relatives, who might seek to control your assets or force you into a remarriage that served their own interests rather than yours. Your social position, while potentially powerful, could also be vulnerable. You might be a target for ambitious men seeking to marry into your wealth. Your reputation, so meticulously maintained during marriage, remember infidelity double standards. Section 11 and social isolation. Section 12, that protected your virtue, could be scrutinized anew, as society perhaps viewed independent women with a degree of suspicion. Scandal, if it touched you, could be devastating. The emotional toll of widowhood was profound. You grieved the loss of your husband, even if the marriage was not one of love, and the familiar routines of your life were shattered. You might also grieve for children lost in infancy, a grief that was perpetual from Section 9. This period of transition, managing a new status and new responsibilities, could be incredibly lonely and stressful for those who chose not to remarry, or who were too old. Life could become increasingly isolated, relying on enslaved household members for companionship, or on their remaining family. The initial freedom could, over time, transform into a different kind of loneliness. You feel the complex emotions swirling within you, the profound grief, the subtle relief from a difficult marriage, and the daunting weight of your newfound independence. You contemplate your future, a mix of possibilities and daunting challenges. The awful truth about love and marriage for Roman women isn't just about the hardships of being a wife, it's about the precarious reality of widowhood. Your life as a widow, though potentially offering a unique form of freedom, transformed your later years into a delicate balance between autonomy and vulnerability, ensuring that even after the death of your husband, your existence was still defined by complex societal pressures, financial uncertainties, and the constant negotiation of a status that, while powerful, was always, ultimately, a precarious blessing in a world still largely controlled by men. Even if you, as a Roman woman, managed to secure a measure of precarious freedom in widowhood, or brought a substantial dowry into your marriage, the ultimate legal framework of Roman society held one final, pervasive bias that often undermined your economic and familial standing: inheritance male preference. Forget equal distribution of wealth or a simple passing down to children regardless of gender. Roman law, deeply patriarchal, consistently favored male heirs and male relatives in matters of inheritance, often marginalizing a woman's claims to her family's wealth and condemning her to a perpetual state of financial dependence on male guardians or her husband's family. You quickly learn that your gender, even more than your legal status, often dictates your ultimate access to wealth and power, turning the very act of passing on family property into a stark reminder of your subordinate position. It's like being a talented chess player, but your most powerful pieces automatically go to your brothers and male cousins. No matter how skilled you are, you stand, perhaps, at the reading of a family will or a legal dispute over inherited property. The atmosphere is tense, formal, and filled with the dry, legalistic language of Roman law. Your father, or your husband, has passed away. You, as a daughter or a widow, naturally expect to inherit a share of the family's accumulated wealth. But the cold reality of Roman legal custom quickly asserts itself. One mainstream historical fact that utterly defines this pervasive legal bias is that ancient Roman inheritance law, despite some variations over centuries, fundamentally favored male heirs' sons, then male descendants and male relatives, with women daughters, wives, or sisters often receiving lesser shares or being legally prevented from inheriting certain types of property directly, requiring male guardians or trustees to manage their inheritance, thereby limiting their direct control over family wealth. This patriarchal bias ensured wealth and power largely remained within male lineages. Think about it, your brother might inherit everything, simply because he's a man. Imagine the nuances of this preference. While a Roman daughter technically had a right to a share of her father's estate, especially if no sons were present, her share might be smaller, or her inheritance might be managed by a male guardian tutor, even if she was sui juris legally independent as a widow. Remember Section 13, effectively limiting her direct control over the assets. The intent was often to protect her property from unscrupulous husbands, or, ironically, to ensure it stayed within the male family line. But the effect was to keep women from directly wielding significant wealth. A particularly quirky tidbit that reflects the male-centric focus of Roman inheritance is the legal concept of agnatic succession, which primarily traced descent through the male line, favoring male relatives like brothers or paternal uncles over female relatives' daughters, sisters in the absence of direct male heirs. This meant that a vast family fortune could pass to a distant male cousin rather than a closer, more beloved female relative. Imagine your family's entire inheritance being legally diverted to a male relative you barely know, simply because he's a man, while you, as a daughter, get a smaller portion or none at all. Historians still argue whether the Roman legal preference for male inheritance, by ensuring the consolidation and continuity of family wealth and political power within established male lines, inadvertently contributed to the long-term stability and strength of the Roman aristocratic system, or if it also fueled resentment, promoted social inequality, and sometimes forced women into undesirable marriages or reliance on male patronage, undermining their personal autonomy and perpetuating their economic dependence. Did it stabilize the state, or just oppress women? For wives, particularly in sine manu marriages, which became more common, recall Section 1's introduction, they did not legally become part of their husband's family. This meant that they did not typically inherit directly from their husband's estate unless specifically provided for in a will. Their primary financial security came from the return of their dowry from Section 4, not from inheriting their husband's accumulated wealth. If a husband died without a will, or if his estate was heavily indebted, a widow might receive little beyond her dowry if it was returned, leaving her in a precarious financial situation. Remember that from Section 13's widowhood, the lack of control over inherited wealth meant that women, even wealthy ones, often struggled to exert direct political or economic power. Their influence often had to be wielded indirectly, through their husbands, sons, or male guardians, making them reliant on male mediation for their ambitions. The grand villas, the sprawling estates, the enslaved workforces, these were rarely truly hers to command, but rather held in trust or passed through male lines. You feel the cold weight of the legal bias, the profound injustice that separates you from wealth simply by virtue of your gender. You watch as a male relative, perhaps a distant cousin, inherits a vast estate, while your own claim, though equally valid in your eyes, is diminished or denied by legal precedent. The awful truth about love and marriage for Roman women isn't just about personal relationships. It's about the pervasive reality of inheritance's male preference. Your life is consumed by a systemic legal bias that limited your financial autonomy and condemned you to a perpetual state of economic dependence, ensuring that the wealth you helped to manage and the lineage you helped to produce was ultimately passed through male hands, a constant reminder that even in death, Roman law continued to prioritize the male line, cementing your place in a profoundly unequal patriarchal system. After navigating the emotional complexities of arranged marriages, the shocking reality of young brides, the transactional nature of the dowry, the pervasive grip of the husband's authority, the devastating ease of divorce, the terrifying dangers of childbearing, the silent scourge of maternal and infant mortality, the uncomfortable reality of concubinage, the brutal double standards of infidelity, the subtle confinement of social isolation, the precarious freedom of widowhood, and the pervasive bias of male inheritance. You finally emerge from our journey through Roman women's marital lives to confront its complex and enduring legacy power, not partnership. The Roman institution of marriage, for all its legal sophistication and societal importance, was fundamentally designed to serve patriarchal power, lineage, and property, not the emotional fulfillment or equal partnership of women. Leaving a profound historical impact on women's roles and the development of future legal systems, you realize that the very roots of some enduring gender inequalities twist back to these ancient Roman marital norms. It's like looking at a magnificent, ancient Roman bridge and realizing its strength comes from a design that inherently supported one side more than the other. And that subtle imbalance persists through time. You reflect on the stark contrasts between your modern understanding of marriage and the Roman reality. The idea of a union built on mutual affection, equal rights, and shared decision-making was largely absent. Instead, marriage was a mechanism for perpetuating the familia, for securing alliances, and for the legitimate production of heirs, particularly sons, to carry on the family name and inherit its wealth. The woman's role was primarily to contribute to this grand patriarchal design, even at immense personal cost. One mainstream historical fact that utterly defines this enduring legacy is that Roman marriage, despite granting women some unique legal rights, like property ownership in San Manu marriage compared to many contemporary societies, fundamentally reinforced a patriarchal structure where women's primary role was reproductive and domestic, serving the male lineage and influencing later European legal traditions that often codified male dominance and limited female autonomy within marriage for centuries. The Roman way of marriage, for all its pragmatic strengths, profoundly shaped subsequent societal norms regarding gender roles and legal rights. Think about it. Some of the legal inequalities you might still fight against today have roots in these ancient Roman practices. Imagine the influence. The concept of marriage as a property transfer, symbolized by the dowry, remember that from Section 4, persisted in various forms throughout European history for centuries, impacting women's economic lives. The legal emphasis on male headship of the household, even if softened over time, has echoes in patriarchal legal systems that endured well into the modern era. The differing legal and social expectations for male versus female fidelity, recall that brutal double standard from Section 11, also left a long, dark shadow on Western marital morality, with women consistently facing harsher judgment for transgressions. A particularly quirky tidbit that demonstrates the Roman influence even on later legal concepts of marriage is the concept of consortium omnis vitae, the partnership of all life. While often a high ideal, it referred more to the shared legal and social status rather than a deep emotional equality. And this concept, despite its romantic sound, was often applied within the context of a male-dominated household. Imagine this legal phrase that sounds so egalitarian, actually reinforcing a hierarchy. And that phrase still influences legal thought centuries later. Historians still argue whether the long-term influence of Roman marriage norms on later European societies, particularly after the fall of the Western Roman Empire and the rise of Christian influence, was primarily due to the inherent strength and pragmatism of Roman law itself, which was widely adopted and adapted. Or if Christian theological interpretations of marriage emphasizing male headship and female submission inadvertently reinforced and even intensified some of the patriarchal aspects of Roman custom, making women's status even more constrained in certain periods. Did Roman law, or Christian interpretation, solidify male dominance more, the relentless pressure on women to be fertile, to bear many children, particularly sons, and the terrifying realities of childbirth and infant mortality from sections 7, 8, and 9, speak to a society that prioritized reproduction above all else for its women. This emphasis endured for centuries, defining a woman's primary social value by her ability to produce heirs, even the elements of female agency that existed, like the increasing prevalence of sine manu marriages and the potential for widowhood to grant autonomy from sections 1 and 13, were often precarious and operated within a male-dominated legal and social framework. They offered glimpses of freedom, but rarely true, universal equality. You stand now, perhaps with a profound appreciation for the choices you have in your own life and relationships. The awful truth about love and marriage for Roman women isn't just a collection of historical facts. It's a powerful reminder of how profoundly human institutions can shape individual lives, and how long the shadows of past inequalities can stretch. Their complex, often brutal, and profoundly unequal system of marriage left an undeniable legacy, cementing the idea of power, not partnership, as the fundamental basis of matrimony for generations, and reminding us that true equality, even in love, is a hard-won victory that continues to be fought for. Building on the silent, often miserable, experiences of women like those in ancient Rome. Now, as the grand Roman villas fade and the echoes of ancient wedding vows grow quiet, let the stillness of your room embrace you. The strategic alliances, the young brides, the brutal childbirths, and the profound inequalities of Roman marriage are safely in the past, part of a history that now dissolves into the gentle hum of your fan. You've journeyed through a world where love was often secondary to duty, and now it's time for you to find your own peaceful rest. Let your mind unwind, your muscles relax, and sink into a deep, undisturbed sleep, far from the complex marital realities of ancient Rome. End of script. Sweet dreams.